So it was around 5 years ago that I first went to Kazakhstan, and that was actually for a trip which the Royal Society for Asian Affairs helped fund through the Sir Peter Hens Memorial Award to ride horses across East Kazakhstan from a point from up here in Ust-Kamenogorsk all the way down to Almaty. It was a journey that took me 64 days. It was around 800 miles, and it was pretty sparse in terms of anything to see or anything to do than just sit on your horse every single day, day in, day out, and get very hoarse, leg sore. And despite the discomfort, which I've talked about in a few lectures for the Society in the past, I really, really enjoyed my time in Kazakhstan. And it started off this passion for this one country that I've gone back to again and again and again. And there was a point, specifically around about here, when I was on my horses, and I've been going for about over a month. It was about 45 degrees centigrade. It was incredibly hot in the middle of the summer, and we were struggling to find any grazing for the horses, anything to really let them subsist. We were struggling to find water. The first water point was here, and then the last one was here, in terms of we had a massive stretch, and it was very desert-like. And I remember going up a crest of a very small hill towards the end of this particular arduous section, and looking out to my right over this vast expanse where things got a hell of a lot more barren, very sandy, and it just seemed to stretch on for miles and miles. And it kicked off this idea in my mind of, well, what about these locations that even the horses can't go to? What about these places that really are the end of, or the deserts of Kazakhstan that, as far as I know, no one's ever been to, so no Westerners ever gone across, no one's ever experienced. And so I came back from that trip entirely exhausted. We rode the horses, and then we ended up spending a month in Tajikistan living with hunters in the Pamir Mountains, and then I ran a bit in the desert in Uzbekistan, and the whole thing took 6 months, and it took about a year to recover from that trip. But it kicked off this idea in my mind to actually start going back to Kazakhstan to look at the places, the gaps that I'd sort of mentally penciled out. So this talk today, we'll talk about 3 of those journeys. We'll talk about this one first. Actually, I've got the order wrong. This is the Betpak Dala. It's also called the Desert of Misfortune, which sits bang smack in the middle of Kazakhstan in about the most remote area that you can go to. And this is a journey that I did in 2014. We'll then talk about the Saryasek Desert, which is the one that I was looking out to from atop my horses, which is the one that I did, is an expedition that I did quite recently, last September. And then also part of that is this one, is the Austria Peninsula, which is a motorized journey that I did at the same time, just after this journey. So I'll go over these various different expeditions, what I saw there, and show you lots and lots of pictures of very, very flat terrain, and hopefully you will find it interesting. And then maybe I'll sum up with a bit of why I did it at the end. Okay, so the first expedition was the Betpak Dala. Now, as I said, this was called the Steppe of Misfortune, or the Desert of Misfortune. It's roughly around 250 miles across. It's around about the same area in terms of kilometres as Scotland, but there's not a single habitation within there. If there are wells, I never saw any. There's no infrastructure, there's no herders, there's no nomads, there's no anything. And I thought, brilliant, let's go across there. So I'll give you a close-up. We'll go to this. This is Lake Balkhash, which is a very large saltwater lake that exists in Kazakhstan. It's not Lake Baikal, which is even larger, but this is the kind of genesis point here for a lot of these trips. Up here you'll have Astana and the steppes that are populated, but everything going this way, there's not really anything. and this is the Aral Sea, and the only real point in here that's of any note is Baikonur, which is the cosmonaut drone where they launched the Russian space flights, which is around about here. And I'd love to cross this bit as well. No, back here. But you need some permissions for that. So I was looking, after I came back from my first trip, I ended up moving to London, I ended up getting a job, I ended up settling into the city life a little bit, and all of a sudden I couldn't spend 6 months at a time travelling to the furthest flung reaches of the world. I had to condense my journeys down, but I still wanted to explore them in a meaningful way, a way that I could actually have a connection with the place that I was going to, even if I couldn't go for a very long period of time. So I decided to take up running. Bit of a weird segue, but the thing with running is that you really connect with the places that you're going through. If anyone has ever set off on a Sunday and gone for a long run in the rain and ended up in a vastly different location that they ever thought that they would be in, even though they just stepped outside their back door, you'll appreciate the thinking behind what I was getting at with this. And I got into running very quickly. I started doing all the races, all the training here in London, and I started to think that, what's the best thing? What's the hardest race that a runner could do? And I looked it up, and the ones that Ben Fogels of the world talk about is the Marathon des Sables, which is a 150-mile, 7-day marathon, a marathon a day for 7 days through Morocco. And I thought, well, okay, I'll look it up, and it turned out to be very expensive. You have to spend like £3,000 or £4,000 to do it, and I was like, well, I think I can do better than this. What I'll do is I'll go for 200 miles, I'll go for 8 days, and I'll do 800 marathons, or 800 marathons? Jesus, 8 marathons. And I'll do it all on my own. I'll have a support crew. I won't go the tourist way, because I was young and brash and I wanted to really make a name for myself. So I got a big truck with some Russians. I found a big desert, which was the Betpat Dala, and then I set off with my little legs to decide to run across it. Now, the Betpat Dala is very sparse. There is not much to see. This is pretty much the one shot. This is actually quite a good shot, because there's a good road. Normally there's not even a good road. The only thing of note, which we'll get to in a moment, is a Russian weapons testing facility, or Soviet weapons testing facility, that was disbanded with the fall of the Soviet Union, and ultimately they only stopped guarding it about 5 or 6 years ago. So up until that point, this was a little bit of a no-go area. The only people who do go in are rich, mainly Middle Eastern hunters who come for the Saiga antelope. Some of you may have heard in the news a couple of years ago that the Saiga antelope suffered a massive wipeout in this very place, the Betpat Dala, although the causes were never really confirmed. It was something to do with bacteria and a disease. So this is the sort of location. This is the crew. We have myself, we have Sergey on the far left, who was my interpreter and just wanted to come along for the ride, also filmed a lot of stuff. And Dima, who was the mechanic, who'd been in the Afghan war, and various other things as a young lad, and could fix pretty much any car on the planet. So we went up to Balkhash, Lake Balkhash. We loaded this car up with as much fuel as we could possibly put into it, and there we got to the edge of it. I got out, and then I started running. Now I don't know if this has got any sound, but it's not really important if it does. The last 15 minutes. No, it didn't. It was basically saying that the last 15 minutes are always the hardest of any single thing. And it's not a very good shot, but this is pretty much exactly what I was doing the whole way through. I was filming it running incredibly slowly, almost at a shuffle, but trying to go to begin with 30 miles a day and then going down to a marathon and trying to hit a marathon every single day. I'd get up, it would be quite cold, it'd be like -5 in the morning. I'd get up, bang on the windows, get them awake because they were really lazy at times, and get them to make me breakfast because I really needed it. And then I'd set off. They'd spend another hour in bed, and then finally they would catch up with me in my slow shuffle pointed west. And this was pretty much exactly the format that was to be repeated over those days. So I won't dwell too much on the actual physicality of putting one foot in front of the other, but I'll touch upon some of the interesting things that I saw and some of the interesting things that I experienced on this particular trip. This is a nose cone of a rocket. They littered the entire landscape from start to finish. These massive nose cones, and this was as close as I got to it, because I was like, oh, I don't know, is this what was in this nose cone? What is this? This is meant to be an experimental weapons testing facility. Like, what's, a little bit dodgy, maybe not bare skin contact. I look round and Dima's got one on his head and he's running across the steppe, having a jolly good time. This is a bit more of the sort of landscape. As you can see, the nose cone, you can imagine how big the missile must have been. It must have been quite a huge thing that they were firing out into this really empty, super barren landscape where there is just nothing. And I compared it a bit to like one of those Wile E. Coyote scenes where he's running and then there's just this scenario, the same sort of backdrop is playing behind him on a roller. It was pretty much that. You would get to one horizon and then it was very demoralizing to actually run across this, because you'd get to the end of one horizon, you'd look over and then it was almost like you'd got to the beginning of where you started again and you'd have to keep on going and jump through. But there were things to break it up. As I say, this was actually the weapons testing facility. This is a radar dome, and there was about 50 different buildings in this location. That some 2 stories. They were all had been like knocked. All the stairwells had been knocked out. There was massive areas where they had obviously excavated all their, they'd taken all their research and buried it. There was even some very interesting things, such as this presumably might have been some sort of children's creche or play area. So you can see this was a very well populated location. And it was around this point that I was like, especially seeing some of the things had been intentionally blown up with, you would see buildings that had this thick reinforced steel girded walls that were just blown to pieces, and I was like, okay, well, is there anything like nuclear here? Is there anything chemical? Is there anything that we should be a little bit wary about? I never really got a clear answer, so that was the case. But apparently not. Some more interesting things, such as 1959. This was height of the arms race. This is a long-standing location. So this was about the midpoint of the journey, and it was just, again, after this base, all roads really broke down, because although people come from some people cross on automobiles from the south to the north. No, some people come out to this base, but no one really ever, at least since Soviet times, goes from the base, which is right about in the middle of the Betpat Dala, all the way out to the river, which is the Ili River, which is it borders the definition of Betpat Dala is the Balkhash Lake on one side and the Ili River on the other. And so no one ever gets out towards that river. So once you got to this point, you're getting into very remote territory. But I was enjoying it. This is my sun protection. So every time that you run, or I would run, And because the landscape didn't change at all, what would happen is I'd get up and the sun would rise over one shoulder. It would stay on one side of me to the south as I ran. And then it would set again. And so what would happen is I kept on getting the glare in one eye, so that the sun glare from keep on this thing getting past all the glasses, all the folds of like my scarf to try and stop it wouldn't make a single bit of difference. So I would end up getting this horrendous like blindness and weeping in one eye. But that was all right. I could deal with that. It was the poisonous vipers was the next thing, and I remember stopping and looking back and seeing the two, Dima and Sergey, who are out the car, and they're looking down and they're just like looking like this, and I'm like, what are they doing? So I kind of ran back to find them, because the car would always follow behind me at like a walking pace. They just kind of chilled out, and sometimes I would actually get to look behind them. They'd both be out the car and they just put like a brick on the pedal or something and just put it into first and just let it walk so they could stretch their legs. So sometimes they would do that, but other times what they would do is like this time when I look back and they'd all stopped, and I kind of ran back to them, and they'd both got plastic bottles, and they're just this poor viper, and they're just poking you with a plastic bottle. I'm like, oh, we're literally 300 miles away from anybody, from the nearest hospital, with a limited amount of fuel. This is like the least advisable thing that I can recommend doing right now. But nevertheless, kept on going through, and these are my shoes by the end of the 6th day. I really started to break down a little bit by the 6th day. Certainly the shoes started to break down as well, and my feet kind of, as you can see, a bit of the covered in sand and swollen, and it became very, very hard going. And so we kind of approached the final section of the journey, and I forgot to say actually that this journey of all things, this explorer's hardman journey that I had in my mind, the only reason I actually managed to go on it was I was working for a fashion agency at the time, and they got me a deal with Hom, who are actually about the most effeminate menswear underwear company that you could imagine. I don't think they're a French company. I don't think they really understood what they were being sold, but they sponsored me on this journey. So I was very grateful for this, but I did have to wear the underwear as well. It was very comfortable. And so I got to about this point, and they tapped me on the shoulder. Dima taps me on the shoulder, and he's like, "So the nearest settlement is around about from here, 250 kilometers away." And I was like, "Okay, great." And he's like, "Yeah, we've got fuel for 280 kilometers." I was like, "Okay." So he's like, "You might want to hurry up." And I was like, "All right, okay." So we kind of struggled over the next thing. The suspension broke in the car, and it was just the last day was an absolute nightmare of things going wrong. And we kept on going all the way into the middle of the night. And this was middle of the night, and this was the only picture I managed to take from my successful crossing. This is meant to be the mighty river that I'd been so desperately trying to see from all those different over those different horizons. And when I finally did get there, it was the middle of the night. And so for some reason, this trip made me want to do another one. So I decided a couple of years later, or 3 years later, that I'd had enough of the London life again, and that actually I should take a little bit of time off my job and start this whole deserts in Kazakhstan thing, because that's apparently my thing now. So the Sariasek Atarau is a smaller desert, and it's here we go. It's basically categorized by, so whereas this one, the Betpat Dala was from here to here, this one's from here to here, and we would instead of going from east to west like I did last time, I would go west to east. And I was like, okay, well the other one was the size of Scotland, this one's smaller, and I don't really have 8 days, because my job, I changed jobs, I was working agency lifestyle, I didn't have that much time. So I thought, well, what I'll do is, instead of doing 8 days, and why don't I just do it in 1 day and do what I hoped would be 100 miles in 1 day. It actually ended up being a little bit less. We'll get to that in a minute. And just do it in one long push, one ultra marathon. I'd start at one end, same setup, have some cars, have some people coming and following me, and just keep on going until I couldn't go anymore. So the process for planning a journey, as with everything, starts on Google. And you go to Google Earth, you look at the map, and then you put some pins into where you think there are tracks, people, rangers, and every now and then go and take different locations. Again, a lot of it's round and about here and round and about here, so the middle bit's the hardest bit to get sorted, because no one really ever goes all the way across, because it is quite a hard journey to do. So what you do is, or how you plan these sort of desert crossings in sort of Soviet areas where there are tracks, is that you just look at it on Google Earth and you go, okay, right, here's a village. Here you can see some of these tracks actually. This is a mass. This is a really big one. This is a really big one. This is quite a big one. And you just you go along, and every time you get to a junction, you kind of trace where the next one goes off in the junction. And you start building your route out, and every single point that you do, you make a note of it, you create a list of waymarks, and then you plug that into a GPS, and then you know that when you're in your car, or when you're running and you have your GPS on you, you know whenever you're getting to a junction, whether you should take the high road or the low road, and you plug your way across from there, and it seems to work by and large. So that was the routine. I was sticking to it. So this was my first view of the Sariasak Atharal, and I thought the first thought that popped into my mind was, "There's not much here." And this was actually really scary, because to begin with the Betpat Dala, I had a big nice road going towards that military base. It was still kind of, if you saw the pictures from before, it was a little bit more grassy. It was a little bit more that I'd been used to from my first horse ride across Kazakhstan, that sort of steppy area. And this was very much, to begin with, going over massive sand dunes. We had real trouble getting the car over the first sand dune out of the village, and I thought, oh, this is not going to be good. But I felt pretty confident. I'd been training a hell of a lot since that first trip, and I'd gone into races, and I'd done marathons, and I'd done this, and I ran. My training for every single one of these journeys always culminates, I don't know why, always culminates with me running either to Brighton or from Brighton. And every time I get to like around about Orpington or somewhere and going, why have I done this? Not because I don't like Orpington, but because it's always just really long way on concrete. And so there was a lot of thoughts going through my mind for this journey on the pondering what was going to come next. And although I knew I was in much fitter shape, this was also a long way to go. I'd never done what I thought was going to be 100 miles in one go. I'd never done more than 50, so anything above, each time I'd done the Brighton route, I had absolutely died in terms of trying to get up the next day, go up and down stairs. It was just, I just couldn't move. So the idea of doubling that distance through a terrain that my first impression of it was awful, was quite daunting, but I persevered a little bit. And so this is my driver, what's his name? Murat, his name was. Found him on the internet. As you do again, find the map on Google and then find the driver on Ask or something. I can't remember where I found him. And I took two friends with me who were going to be my photographers. So for this one, we have some slightly fancier kind of hero shots, but it's a little bit more glamming me up for this. It was not the case. It was a lot of very slow running, and as you can see, the terrain to begin with is very difficult. What what I think, or what I believe, I haven't found any research to support this, but the terrain either side of the rivers that feed into Lake Balkhash, so there's one that feeds in on the westernmost edge and one that feeds in on the easternmost edge. This terrain is a lot more sand duney, a lot more bumpy, a lot more as if it was formerly under the water. And then as you get more towards the middle, I wouldn't say it's higher ground, but it's obviously where the water's not penetrated as much. It's flatter, the ground's more compact, there's less sand. So it's, you can see that there's this influence of all this massive water that used to sweep across Asia. So that, used to link the Caspian with the Aral Sea, for instance, all these very, very shallow sea basins. And when that drained, it left behind these very tumultuous landscapes, which I hadn't planned on at all. I'd gone in with the impression that I would be going up and down the Betpat Dala, which is just flat. You just go flat, 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 flat. So I hadn't done any hill training, so I was very much regretting it as I set along. And this journey was rather the same in many regards. This is as I'm starting to get into the flow of things. This is about 35 miles in. I was probably about 8 or 9 hours in. It wasn't a very fast pace at all. I've got a video in a moment that I'll show you how slow I was going at certain times. But it was very flat, and my core friends who were taking the photos of me, we had a different system for this journey, and that was that they would drive ahead for 2 miles, and then I would meet them. So the last one was the car would follow behind me, and this one I would meet up with the car. And so they would have to watch me 2 miles away as I slowly became an ever bigger dot on the horizon until I got to them, and then I'd probably walk past them, and then they'd drive on again, and then they'd have to sit down and wait for the next stop to arrive. And there was one point that this was really hot as well. This is about 35 degrees, I think, which for the running was really, really difficult, and I hadn't planned on it. I'd planned on it being a little bit cooler, based on my experiences in the other deserts. And there was one point around the 35-mile mark where I ran out of water, and I was drinking about a litre every half an hour or something, every 45 minutes. So it was really, really just guzzling water to try and keep going. And there was a point where I misjudged it. Marat, the driver, Marat driver got bored, so went maybe 3 miles instead of 2, so it meant he didn't have to go as far, he didn't have to keep on going, stopping and starting as much. And I didn't fill up the water on the previous journey, the previous refill point. So I ran out of water, and then I still couldn't see the car, and I kept on shuffling, and the terrain was really hot, awful, much worse than this. This is actually quite nice terrain. I started to go a bit faint, my vision went a bit black and white, and I got to the car and I pretty much collapsed. And then my photographer friend was like, "This is perfect, let's get hold it right there, do not drink water, sit right there in the shade and take this picture, let me take your portrait of you." At this point I was absolutely dying. And so very, very much continued in this vein. And he got into the middle ground, and we basically realised that we're running out of light, and we wouldn't know what, we wouldn't be able to navigate as efficiently. And then if we made a mistake and went 10 miles the wrong way, I was no way ever going to complete the journey if I had to go 10 miles back. So we decided to make the call that actually, rather than doing it in one continuous push, what we'll do is we'll camp down for like 6 hours until it was light again. So this is just, it doesn't look it, but this is about evening time. And so we stopped, and by this point I was about 50 miles, 50 miles, and we'd crested over the middle section, which was the most barren section, and we were starting to get into bits where there were more people. So we actually found a shepherd, and he wasn't a nomad, he was definitely a shepherd, who was living out here in the middle of nowhere, and he very kindly took us in for a few hours. Interesting story with him is that he didn't have any, this is such a Russian story, this is an awful picture of me collapsing for that bit of the journey, so I'm going to move on from that because I hate the picture. The interesting story with the shepherd was that he didn't have any fingers because, and this is the most Russian/Kazakh story I can ever imagine, is because he got blackout drunk in the middle of winter and decided to go smoke a cigarette, and then but was so drunk that he collapsed and then his glove was off, and so he lost all the fingers on one hand, and he tells it as if it's just like he'd just gone shopping or something. It was oh yeah, I've lost all my fingers. And I was like, okay, but this is kind of the sort of people the sort of mentality that you need to have in these areas over the course of, especially winter here, because winter gets so incredibly cold. It's like Siberia. I had around 6 hours sleep. I did not sleep very well. My legs were in pain. Didn't really, it kind of became a bit of a shuffle, and it generally became very hard going. And if anybody here has ever gone for a run, my average time to do to do a mile went from, the fastest mile I've ever done is in 4 minutes and 35 seconds, and this by the end of this, or towards the end of this journey, by about mile 60, mile 70, I was doing 18-minute miles, which I think if you were to walk to, say, Oxford Circus from here, you would do it in quicker than the 18 minutes that I was shuffling and still calling it a run. And it was very difficult. It was very hard. It was very hard mentally. The only way that I could keep on going and keep on pushing forwards was just to focus on 1 mile at a time and just watching my GPS clock tick over 0.1 of a mile, 0.2 of a mile, 0.3 of a mile, and then I would try and, once I got to 1 mile, I'd try and get to 2 or 3, and then if I got to 5, then I was into the, and then I could get into 10, and then from there it would build up, and you just had to start really, really slow and keep going. And that's what I did. My knees went. It all got really awful until I got to the river, and this is a slightly better river, and I got it in. I got there in daylight, so it was actually a bit better for the photography. But even that wasn't guaranteed. My friends drove ahead as usual, and these two photographers who are very pristine, and they want to get setting up the shot exactly right to get me so that I could come, I was coming down the hillside, and I would come to the river, and they would film it, and they'd take the picture, and I'd have this really happy smile on my face. And as they're setting up the shot, Marat just drives in front into the river to start washing his car, and they're like, "Get out of the way! We need to this is what we've come." It was 70 miles in the end. The route varied slightly from what I'd put on the GPS route, so it was actually and we took a slight detour south to meet it a little bit earlier because I was struggling so much. So it was a 70-mile run in 30 hours. So I was a very happy person at the end of that. And I thought, well, after all this nightmarish, grueling, masochistic struggles through these very unknown places, we should celebrate by going to another unknown place. And this is the Austria Peninsula. But we decided, me, my two photographer friends, that we wouldn't be quite so hard on ourselves this time, and this was a vehicle excursion. And the reason that I really wanted to include the Austria into this talk tonight is because this is a really amazing location, and it's a location that's also very, very accessible if you ever do want to go yourself, and it does have the infrastructure for tourism and actually visiting. But it just really gives you a sense as to why I love this country so much and the variety of this country. And this is 2,000 miles away, or 1,800 miles away from the other locations that I was talking about. It's a 4-hour flight to get to this point, but you can fly there direct from to a place called Aktobe from Gatwick, or you can do what I did to Almaty and across. So I'll give you this location. And Aktobe is and Atarau, the two locations, are mainly known for their oil, their natural gas, and British interest has usually been focused on working with the Kazakhs in terms of natural gas exploration. That didn't bother me though. I wanted to go and have a look around the Austria Peninsula, which is where the Caspian Sea had receded from, leaving this really amazing alien-like location that is just phenomenal to explore. We got another car, we got another driver. I've unfortunately forgotten the driver's name on this. We got a load of beer. Put it into the back, and there was no running that was to be had, but lots of exploration, finding really interesting things like sort of natural arches that were made from this very sort of saltstony kind of, almost like the White Cliffs of Dover, and just kind of exploring the salt plains as well. This is all salt flats that were that kind of abounded across the region. We didn't really have any plan or goal in mind. We just wanted to really see what was there. So we did a big tour. It was about 1,200 kilometers we covered in the end over the course of about 4 days. So we were really pushing it. This is a cricket that he found in the salt plains. You can see his can of beer there. Some standard tourist photography. But there's lots of like geological interest as well. Shark's teeth, you can just pick up from the side of the rock. Lots of fossils. My friends discussing their next photographs, and then just actually had a bit of a relaxation point as well, and tried to kind of appreciate the nothingness that still existed in this location as well. But despite the fact that there's not been much, or maybe because of it, there is a lot of beauty as well. There's a lot of there's something about a sunrise or a sunset in these locations where the whole world glows red, and you just see it's just this amazing place to be. And there's no sound, there's no planes, there's no anything, there's no traffic. It's just this utter stillness, which for London, especially living in London, is quite a rarity. And these locations just got better and better. It became like Monument Valley. There's just these amazing locations that no one had ever really or very few people have ever been up here. So we were like, right, let's try and climb that. Oh no, we can't do that. Let's run back down. Oh look, there's a tortoise. And looking at these scenarios, and this is really getting towards we worked our way south towards the border of Turkmenistan, and this is where it gets really quite remote. Again, the settlements start to run out. The locations start to really get a little bit more sparse, and you get to a location called here, which is this is called the Three Brothers, or Tribita. I can't remember how they called it in Kazakh. And at the other end of, on the other side of that salt pan is Turkmenistan, and there's border guards, and we needed a border permit to be here, so we shouldn't have been here, technically. So we're like, okay, well, we'll just visit quickly, and then we'll turn around very quickly and go back. And my friend was like, yep, that's great, that's fantastic. And then proceeded to set up a 20-minute time lapse. So you could capture the locations. And so really, it was this journey from one end of the country to the other. And the locations do change, the little nuances do change in terms of what you're looking at and the visuals that you're looking at. And I think that that's really what kept me so interested, was these places that no one, or very few people, have ever been to. I think, as far as I'm aware, it was the first on-foot crossing of the Betpadala and the first on-foot crossing of the Sari-Sekatara. So they should be certainly the first Western crossing that I've ever heard of or come across. And there's something special about the location and going to those locations where you can actually be the first person to do something. Yeah, there's that as well. But I think what's more of a driving factor is the world is so much bigger in these places, and you look at here and you're looking out, and you just seem so insignificantly small, but also so amazed at the beauty that exists there. And tourism in Kazakhstan is opening up, and it's not just you can go without a visa nowadays for 2 weeks. And places like this are you can go see this location, it's not at the end of the world. And so I guess I'd end with a message that there are some amazing places to see in Central Asia, but also in here. And just because there's this notion that there's flat and there's nothing there, it's really not the case. So I'd say go if you can. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That puts running for the bus into a different sort of perspective. I would like just to sort of start with one question that crossed my mind. In the Austria Peninsula, clearly there was no one else to be seen, but unless you were doing a lot of driving backwards and forwards in the same place, there were quite a lot of vehicle tracks in the sand. Who's out there?
Yeah, so the thing with the locations is that the salt pans, it's not a very regenerative environment. So if you make a marker impression, that stays for years at a time. As you saw with the other two journeys, so the Betpadala, for instance, no one's been there since the Soviets were there, but the tracks still remain. So that the environment itself is quite keeps the traces of humankind. But I mean, this last one, although the habitation is quite sparse, this is a location that locals do visit. They go hunting, they go running around up these different things. This last area, not so much, because this is a special border zone area that you're not really meant to be in. But the other ones you can do, and there are also that tourism exists, mainly tourism for Russian Federation tourists, those who speak Russian will know about it more. But it is opening up for Western tourists as well.
You never thought of taking a Geiger counter?
A Geiger. I did after the Betpadala. I did consider buying one. They're about £80, but I never did it in the end. So it seems to be an unfortunate history with me that I also in Tajikistan my guide took me to a valley and took me to meet all these people and had this whole time and went up and explored the valley, and then when we left the valley he then took us and stopped us by a sign and pointed to the sign, and it was like, don't go radiation, because it was an old uranium mine. It's like, told me after the event, so I feel like I've already probably been irradiated, so it's what's a little bit more.
Did you bother to check the Foreign Office website?
Yeah, so I'm quite the Foreign Office do know about my mad cat adventures here. I have synced with them a few times. They've helped me out when we had an unfortunate incident where we got into the country on a business visa supplied to us by Kazakh officials, but they couldn't be bothered to actually put it to an actual business, so they made up the business. So then when I came to register with the police, which I had to do before I had to leave the country, they were like, well, you need to get a letter of saying why you're here, and then I went to the address and found that all the copper wiring had been pulled out of the walls. So I had to run to the consulate in Almaty to beg them to write me an official note. It's fairly safe. There's nothing that you wouldn't find in any other part of the world. Certainly, I've never really apart from the very far north, I've never really encountered any overt hostility.
How did you find Sergei and Dima? How did you come across them?
Sergei and Dima was right. So I wanted to. So I had some connections with the British Kazakh Society who knew someone in. This is from the first trip, who could possibly help me with buying and selling horses. Their friend helped me sell the horses when this other guy disappeared, and I became good friends with him. And he referred me to someone else, who was a mechanic, who was actually Marat, who was in the second, the Sarasak Atarau, who you might have got the impression was a bit of a lazy bum, didn't want to go do the Betpak Dala because it was too dangerous. So he referred me to Sergei and Dima. So it was about 6 or 7 people down the line.
Jamie, congratulations for carrying on in the great British bonkers tradition of doing this. I mean, you know, I'm in awe and slightly shocked by somebody who wants to run across the Betpak Dala because it is ridiculously empty.
Yeah.
I and my colleagues in the British Embassy in Astana were taking bets whether you were going to become a DBN, a distressed British national.
Oh, okay.
So thank you so much for not, because we couldn't work out what we were going to do. In the middle of, two questions, if I may. You mentioned about the Saiga antelope, the ones with the huge noses, which suffered this catastrophic death, which actually has been really got the attention of people in CDC Atlanta, because it's the first time they think a bacteria has jumped into the mammalian species.
Okay.
And that rings huge alarm bells. So question number one, did you come across any evidence of that? Did you, in your conversations with Dima and others, did people refer to the fact that 90% of the world's population of this antelope were dying at the time you were running?
I think it happened. It happened. So the Betpak Dala run was in 2014. So it was prior to the actual incidents. I didn't actually see any Saiga antelope actually, even then. So my experience with the Saiga is limited. But I was writing for, or I was doing sort of strategy for a company that was a nature company. They were trying to do nature documentaries like Netflix. And I was, as soon as it happened, I was trying to write an article on it or get people to write articles on it, and I was hounding them for giving me the results of the tests, but I never really got a conclusive answer from them, but I assume more research has been done since.
And secondly, in your travels and your conversations, do you get a sense of people leaving the countrysides and moving to the cities, or would you get a sense that these are areas that never were populated?
So these areas were never really populated. There are some khans and some sort of like limited sporadic things from ancient civilizations, but nothing of any contemporary value, contemporary like placement. The horse ride that I did in 2013 was more of that, and so the aim of that horse ride was to go down the old postal roads from the Tsarist Empire, from Uska-Menogorsk to Almaty, and I was following an old British explorer 100 years on from when he'd first done it, and basically in that one he tells an account of how every 30 versts, so 30 kilometres or so, he would get to a post office, he would change horses, and then he would continue with fresh horses down the road, and you could get this sense of this continuous chain of humanity. With that, we really struggled because we assumed that was still the case, but actually with automobiles and stuff like that, what's the point in living in a really, really harsh environment, very desert-like environment, when you can drive half an hour and you're in a very nice location? So there's no point to maintain the infrastructure in between. And so you've really got a sense of that people were people were going away from the truly nomadic and kind of rural to slightly more township kind of locations, I would say. But that's that's my experience of the eastern part of the country. I wouldn't want to speak for the western, because I've only ever been for this short foray.
One quick question. You mentioned your two drivers were Russian. Bear in mind that the Soviets had a big influence in Kazakhstan for many years. Were these in fact native Russians, or were they Kazakhs speaking Russian as opposed to Kazakhs speaking?
So they're Kazakh. They the nationality is Kazakh. Their background or ethnicity was probably Soviet. They are, but they are Kazakh citizens, etc. They're not Russian expats or anything like that. But they speak Russian. I would converse with them in Russian.
So Russian is spoken widely, that's not a problem. But
Yeah.
I'm just curious as whether, because there are a lot of Soviet troops based out there, a lot of Air Force people, I wondered if these were people left over from their parents, perhaps, who had decided to stay in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely could be the case. I never really asked on the background that they come from. But I mean, especially for the horse riders, etc., going up to the northeast corner, like Usk-Kamenogorsk, Semiplastisk, they're almost predominantly. I went around Usk-Kamenogorsk and it was 95% Russian or Russian ethnicity.
Russian
Descent. Yeah.
So what's next in terms of bonkers adventures?
Well, I'm a bit of a completionist, so there are there's one more desert that's called the Rin Desert, which is on the North Caspian, which is very remote. I don't know what manner I would cross it. And then there's also the Aral Kum, formerly the Aral Sea. But I think I need to not only I won't need a Geiger counter, but I'll need some sort of gas mask for that one, because it's a bit dangerous to inhale those sands. So a few more in Kazakhstan, and then I'll have to find another country to tick off.
Thank you very much. Well, tell us when you're going and we'll book you in.
Thank you.